open this public hearing of the Standing Committee on Regional Development, Infrastructure and Transport's inquiry into local government funding and fiscal sustainability. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today, and I pay my respects to their ancestors and their elders past, present and future. I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in their cultural and spiritual connections to Australia's lands and waters. In accordance with the Committee's resolution of 28 August 2025, this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on the inquiry website. I remind members of the media who may be present or listening on the web of the need to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. And I now welcome the representatives of the Department of Home Affairs and the National Emergency Management Agency to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Jill Charker, Deputy Coordinator General, Disaster Resilience and Recovery from the National Emergency Management Agency.
Amy Dyde, Acting Assistant Secretary in the Law Enforcement Policy Branch from the Department of Home Affairs.
And Melissa Ryan, First Assistant Coordinator General from Programs Division within NEMA.
Thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to discussion.
No opening statement from NEMA. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, great. All right, that's okay. We might just start. So thank you, first of all, for making your submission. I guess I might just start with just a very broad sort of question. So how does the Australian government support our local governments in disaster response and recovery funding?
No, I'm happy to provide some context which might be helpful to the committee. Thank you, Chair. NEMA, as we've discussed, is, or as you'd be aware rather, is the Australian Government's National Disaster Management Agency. So we have a range of functions across the continuum of emergency management, through from preparedness all the way through to response, recovery, reconstruction and resilience. The NEMA's view in relation to disaster response and recovery is that local governments particularly are absolutely central in the disaster management system. We note that in different states and territories there are different ways that relationship and that role of local governments is codified or documented. Some states it's in legislation, it's different in other states, but regardless of how it's codified or arrangements are made formally, local government is at the front line of when a disaster is coming and then occurs from a recovery point of view. So NEMA regards the role of local government as being absolutely central in disaster management from our perspective. We also note from a broad NEMA point of view that disasters are occurring with more frequency, more severity. I note that since the year 22-23 up to the current time, there's been 220 disaster events nationwide just in that 3-year plus this current financial year period to date. And many local government areas are activated or impacted by disasters and consequently activated for assistance. In the 24-25 year alone, so just that one financial year, 223 unique local government areas were activated for a disaster event. If you include areas that were activated more than once, so for more than one event, that number rises to 371 local government areas in that financial year alone. 371 local government areas if you include those LGAs that are counted more than once, they're activated more than once, just in the 24-25 year alone. The primary Commonwealth funding support to states and through states to local government in disaster recovery is what's known as the DRFA. That's the Disaster Recovery Funding Arrangements. This is not a classical grants type program that you might see in other grants programs of Commonwealth funding. It's a cost sharing set of arrangements to support states and through states, local governments. It's based on the principle that disaster is a shared responsibility across all three levels of government. It works through the states because states have the constitutional lead for emergency management and response. It is also based around the principle that it is the states that are best placed to determine what recovery support is needed for a particular event. The size and scale of what we're dealing with disasters is very significant. Under the DRFA arrangements that I've just described, about $26 billion at the moment we are overseeing in NEMA in total. That's nationwide at present. About $16 billion of that is for reconstruction costs, mainly roads, as you would expect post a disaster event. In terms of what proportion of that flows to local governments, based on the data we've sought from one state, it's about 60% of that amount flows directly to local governments to support particularly reconstruction. So if you extended that nationally, it would be about $16 to $17 billion goes to local governments. So I think in terms of disaster response and recovery funding, the cost-sharing arrangements are the main vehicle for recovery funding through states to local governments, and we work really closely with the states, who in turn work with the local governments to activate that as promptly as we can.
Can I just follow up? So the 60% to local government, so presumably the other 40%
would go to the state.
Yeah.
So it's a cost-sharing arrangement, and then obviously a lot of that flows on to local governments, to councils, absolutely.
Yeah. Is there any way to tell from that 40% how much flows through to local government?
So the 40% would be the balance that goes to state, and 60% would flow through on average. So if you take the total amount of funding that's in play, about 60% of that flows through the state to local governments, and the balance 40% to the state. That's right. And the state will administer programs like personal hardship assistance, individual counselling, mental health support, legal support. All of those other programs would typically be administered by a state government department.
So they could obviously still benefit.
Indeed.
It will benefit the community because there'll be like primary producer grants and small business grants and not-for-profits as well that will feed into the local communities in their recovery needs.
I was just referring to where the money goes to who's doing the delivery. That's right.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, so if you had, for example, we probably all come from disaster-stricken areas, but where you've got that those recovery centres set up later providing that advice, so that sounds like it would be part of that sort of...
It may well be. Arrangements can vary state to state, though, is what I would note.
Yeah, sure.
So in a given state, they may run at the state level, establishment of some centres. In other states, it's devolved and it's done locally.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Deputy Chair.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. I just note that I'm the member for the Mid-North Coast of New South Wales.
Oh, yes.
So my electorate was slammed from top to bottom.
Yeah,
so can I just go to the DRFA and to section 4 when it talks about essential public asset reconstruction?
Yep.
The agreement talks about the rebuild is essentially to be pre-disaster function. Now, I'm interested in your views, given, for example, bridges in my electorate that were completely washed away were more than 60 years old, and noting concerns expressed regarding the impact of climate change. Is that still a relevant requirement, given that building back at the same level would simply mean building back at a flood level that would be a challenge for those bridges to continue to function for the community.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can, maybe if I provide two initial points on that.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. One is that where there's an asset of an age like that, typically in the intervening period, building standards have changed. And so when, if an event occurs, at the current time, an asset is built back, it might be built back to the similar functionality, but it must accord with the current building standards, which often necessitate improvements to the function and the design and the build of that asset. So it's not a case of building it in necessarily exactly as it was 60 years ago if relevant standards have shifted in that time.
I guess my concern being, given again drawing on the local example, that the council has struggled to get agreement from the state for betterment, essentially betterment of the bridge to ensure that the functionality meets current conditions, including increased threats of floods.
Absolutely.
So my concern being that this language is not clear and it gives an out clause for the states to make it difficult for councils who are desiring to do the right thing.
No, I understand.
I just know, so that hasn't been an issue.
No, so that was
issue?
exactly the second thing I was going to go to, apart from the building standards changes, the betterment issue. So NEMA has been saying for years that betterment, that we shouldn't be rebuilding roads or bridges necessarily in the same place or to the same standard, because so many of them, as you said, get re-impacted. We are in the DRFA, states have the capacity and often regularly ask, particularly Queensland and New South Wales, there's been cases, and other states, of additional funding, the betterment funding in the DRFA, and it is absolutely open to the state to request that of the Commonwealth. They do that in the standard way. It's called Category D under DRFA, so there's different buckets. Category B under DRFA relates to the reconstruction of the asset back to the function it was pre-disaster, notwithstanding if there's been building standard changes, etc. But they can also, if they want to, the state can ask the Commonwealth to cost share money for the betterment of that asset. That bit's funded also under DRFA, under Category D. Queensland has extensively utilised betterment funding for many years in the reconstruction of assets. The other comment, pardon me, I would make is in relation to the reconstruction bucket under B, pardon me, if a state seeks to reconstruct an asset or potentially many assets post a disaster, and they're obviously funded for that or partially funded, cost shared by the Commonwealth, where they expend less in that reconstruction than the amount we've agreed that will be funded for. That's called an efficiency. That can be retained by the state, and the state can then allocate that to any other resilience or risk reduction or betterment opportunity that it sees fit. So Queensland has a well-established efficiencies pipeline that they now routinely allocate out for betterment and other resilience projects as well.
I guess this goes to my other point. Is that's a state that relies, relying therefore on the state to want to dip into its coffers to put money on the table for Cat D for the Commonwealth to match it. And that's not consistent across the states. That's the challenge with betterment not, being clearer and available under B.
Okay, so betterment's under D.
I know, but that's my point. My point is it relies on the state to be willing to put money on the table. And so in New South Wales, we struggle to see that.
Sure.
And that becomes, I guess, my concern being that if betterment is needed because of environmental conditions changing anyway,
absolutely.
My question is, could it not be in B?
That's a matter for the Australian government to consider.
Or a recommendation of this committee.
Look, and obviously that's open to you to consider. Our view at the moment would be betterment is available. We've released guidance material to support states with making betterment applications. We support assessment of betterment applications routinely. There would be over $1 billion of betterment that's been funded under DRFA in over the last few years. nationwide. And I think the challenge again is that under the current principles of DRFA, it is a shared responsibility and it's managed through the states, because it is the states that have constitutionally responsibility for emergency management. Yeah, that's the current settings.
Would it be possible for NEMA to provide a state-by-state breakdown of the total amount of betterment funding?
Yeah, we can take that on notice, absolutely.
I might just, because I know Ms. Fiscal has to go, so I might just
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks so very much. I just wanted to see if you could explore a bit further about some of the issues that you're experiencing, or in terms of your engagement with local governments in that recovery period following a disaster.
Yep.
What are local councils saying are the major issues that they are facing getting back on their feet? Like, so is there a consistency to that? So what are the issues? Yeah, what are the issues?
So I might just take one step back.
Sure.
In the first instance, the biggest impact on councils is actually pre a disaster occurring,
sure.
which is getting. This is what we hear, which is
sure.
getting adequate warnings to undertake preparations.
Sure.
So the strength of the council's relationships with emergency management agencies statewide and with the Bureau of Meteorology is really critical, so that they're actually getting information through in a timely manner. So, for example, in New South Wales last season, I understand there was an issue with council workers having to open gates on some of the levees to reduce pressure in the system, and in order for councils to be comfortable they could send one of their staff out to do that, they had to know it was safe. In order to know that it was safe, they had to get an understanding of river heights, and so it's critical that sort of information, it directly guides decision making and in turn for preparedness for councils before an event. During the middle of an event, the issue for councils typically turns to councils balancing having to do their own BAU activities with responding to the disaster event. So managing roads, rates, all of the functions local councils, that has to go on, but as also does the response to the emergency. So for councils, we hear that getting access to a skilled workforce that can come in and relieve, and often fatigue is an issue in the workforce in councils, and particularly in councils that are smaller, which often correlates with remoteness or regionality. So we often hear, CEOs, CFOs, chief engineers in councils, those folk often are under enormous pressure when there's a disaster event on. So that is a major issue during a disaster event. I note that Queensland, the Local Government Association of Queensland, or LGAQ, runs a program called the Council to Council program. That is a program that is highly regarded, because what it does is it sends council staff from non-disaster affected councils to councils in disaster affected areas, e.g. sewerage engineers or financial controllers or whatever.
That's good.
It literally lends them to disaster affected councils to help relieve some of the load and the fatigue on the council's normal staff. So workforce fatigue and load is an issue. And then in response and early recovery, sort of moving forwards, it is really important, councils say they want to know, we're carrying the load here for managing impact, response, what can we get reimbursed for? So what are the activities, and councils can be reimbursed under DRFA for any activities associated with protecting people and protecting council property. But there are a whole bunch of other range, of assets that councils own that like parks, libraries, that are really essential to how a council functions, which still need to be cleaned up, that still need to be fixed up. And different understandings across the country of what can and can't be reimbursed can lead to inefficiency in the recovery process, because councils aren't sure. We've been running road shows, NEMA that is, for some years now, virtually and in person, to try to share some of that understanding with councils to assist.
Thank you. My apologies, I do. That's right.
So are you saying then that there are, in some cases, there might be things that councils are not claiming to be reimbursed for?
They are. Sometimes we hear that there is confusion around what they can claim for or claim to the state to get reimbursement for. So we work really hard with the states, and then, as I said, we have run and do run roadshows with councils periodically to say, you know, these are the sorts of costs that you can claim back from your state, who in turn claims it back from the Commonwealth to support you. So as I said, it's basically almost any cost relating to protecting people and costs relating to protecting or reconstructing public council assets, you know, roads we're just having a conversation about, etc.
Yeah. Great. All right, thank you. Ms Landry, or Mr.
Well, I just actually probably wanted to follow on with that a bit with regards to BOM. Do you have any oversight over
No, that's a completely different portfolio.
Oh, it is, yeah.
Yes.
No, well, it probably just flows on a bit with the councils, with people having to go out, council workers, and looking at water readings and all that sort of thing in the rivers, because obviously the Fitzroy and Rocky flooded recently, and the feedback we were getting from councils is not everything's run by governments. A lot of things are in like private property, and then you're reliant on the general public to go and get permission to go onto someone's land if someone's moved and all the rest of it. And I don't know, I just think that when you've got major rivers that are affecting tens of thousands of people, that I think we're letting the areas down with old systems, and that we really need to have a good look at what we're doing with that because, you know, the Fitzroy River takes 10 days to flood, but for the main waters to come down, but, you know, to be able to know what the readings are further up so that you know how much preparation the council needs to do is
absolutely.
significant.
That's a warning, right?
Yeah.
Apologies, I'm obviously different portfolio, you know, different organisation, but certainly I am aware that the Bureau is working through a flood warning infrastructure network program where they're purchasing river gauge assets and slowly integrating that into their information system with that aim in mind, to make that information more readily available and in a more timely manner.
And just one more thing, I've had several flood areas, a place called Clermont in the western part of my electorate too. Yeah. I feel that as a person in opposition that it's difficult for us to get information.
Sure.
Like my office has not really received anything about what upgrades are going to be happening and all that sort of thing. So I just thought, you know, it's probably handy that both sides get information, not just government sides.
No, I mean, would there be an opportunity for your office to reach out to the Office of the Minister for the Bureau of Meteorology, for example? Or I also note NEMA has provided, on request to our Minister's Office, briefings to opposition senators and members of the House of Representatives on occasion where there's been a disaster event. So that if asked, we will always, you know, support that. So that would just be a matter of the relevant officers at the ministerial level sorting that out.
Okay, righto, thanks.
Yep.
And Mr Burnell.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back to the Disaster Ready Fund and just touch on some of the statistics that you mentioned at the very start around the number of incidents where disasters have occurred and the multiple sites. I'm interested in getting an understanding of the application of funding for remediation following a disaster, what the level of oversight is to ensure that we are safeguarding against future disasters potentially happening in the same location, and to get an understanding of how much money's been spent in areas where these multiple occurrences have occurred.
It's probably two main focus areas maybe to answer that. Thank you for the question. One is the discussion we just had, which is about opportunities to build back better, to build back in a more resilient manner. So when there has been an actual event and councils and state governments are looking to rebuild or reconstruct public assets like bridges and roads, etc., that's one opportunity that can be used to seek betterment funding, as we've just discussed.
But what level of oversight do we have
Yep.
as far as ensuring that that's what's occurring? So where you've got multiple emergency events that occur,
Yes.
and repetitive access to grant funding or request for remediatory funding to rebuild a road,
Yep.
do we have oversight and say, no, we're not looking to just rebuild the road, we want to see what your mitigating measures around betterment are going to be? Is that a part of our remit to demand an upgrade in those areas to stop the repeated disaster effects?
Yeah, that's not so. NEMA, it's not part of NEMA's remit,
right?
To say to a local government or to a state, you should be applying for betterment for this asset. But what we do is work really closely with the states to say this betterment is available. If you want to apply for it, make a case, to government, and it's the Prime Minister who considers requests for betterment. But there's as a standard application form, etc. Make the case. For example, Queensland, again, if I go back up there, has a well-established mechanism of saying this particular asset, our data have indicated it's been impacted by disaster 4 times in the last 10 years. If betterment for this asset were funded, we estimate it would save $50 million in the next 5 years. So they can build the case. So we work to support states to do that. But the actual application for the assistance or the request has to come from the state, because states have constitutionally the emergency management responsibilities. The other option, though, which I would touch on more generally, so this is not linked to a particular disaster event, but a more general option, is the Disaster Ready Fund, DRF, not to be confused with DRFA. We have a lot of Ds and Rs that we deal with, apologies. So the Disaster Ready Fund is your more classical grant program. So DRFA, as I said before, it's cost sharing. It's not a true grant, a classical grant program. DRF, though, is up to $200 million of Commonwealth funding every year, with co-contributions by the project proponents. For projects specifically aimed at addressing disaster resilience, reducing risk, could be infrastructure, could be design of a levee, could be improved warning systems, etc., etc. So that is also an avenue open to states and through states' local governments to apply for disaster ready fund funding as well. And in fact, a lot of disaster ready fund funding flows in fact to local governments currently as the delivery agencies for that funding.
Okay. I'm mindful of time.
So just on that, so is there a split with the DRF funding projects that go directly to local council? Like there's 200 million each, up to 200 million each year, but how much actually goes to local?
Yeah, so the Disaster Ready Fund it's running for 5 years at the moment, pending later government decision making about going forwards. We've had 3 rounds of grant funding to date. The last one was announced a couple of months ago. Across rounds 1, 2 and 3, there's been 450 projects that have been invested in to better prepare and protect communities, so about 600 million investment from the Commonwealth to date. Across the first 3 rounds, of those 450, 247 are projects led by local governments and their delivery partners, which equates to, in fact, $312 million. So $312 million have already flowed to local governments for the delivery of DRF projects as well. So in the most recent round, it was $110.1 million for 49 projects delivered by local governments under DRF.
Great, thank you. We might go to Ms. Jordan-Baird.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. My name's Alice. I'm the member for Gorton in Melbourne's western suburbs. Victoria obviously has its own share of natural disasters, given the recent bushfires we've seen, as well as floods in regional Victoria, and a little bit closer to home. A few years ago, we had some pretty significant flooding in the member for Maribyrnong's patch as well. My question is around how does your department work with local governments and sort of water authorities in flood-affected communities, whether it's sort of flood prevention or flood mitigation? I'd love to hear sort of what your role is in that and what new challenges have arisen for local government areas in responding to disasters like floods.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think on the second part of your question, which is what new challenges have arisen, it is primarily an issue of more disaster events which are more intense, and that in turn exacerbates the issues I talked about with staffing, with resourcing. For some councils, maintaining a workforce when some councils are just in this perpetual recovery mode, so they barely recover from one event and then they're into another one on top of that. So that is, I think, an increasing challenge. It's not new, meaning it started last week, but it is a continuing trend over time that we're seeing. On your issue specifically about water authorities, so we work through the state. We provide advice to the state on request when the state seeks support in either a recovery context or in the context of the resilience and the risk reduction grant program, the Disaster Ready Fund I talked about before. But we are often asked to comment more generally on related issues around flood, which goes to issues around insurance, for example. So NEMA is the lead on the Hazards Insurance Partnership, which has a particular focus on flood. It's not solely flood, it is natural hazards in general, but there has been a lot of work done looking at flood risk and the impact of that on insurance premiums. So we have a policy function in that regard as well. So we engage broadly, including with water authorities, local governments, through the states on flood issues in general, including flood risk.
And I understand that BOM look after the flood warnings, that's sort of their jurisdiction. How do you work with BOM in this work?
Yeah, the primary connection point between NEMA and BOM is up the front end around shared situational awareness and shared information. So we maintain in NEMA a 24-hour 7-day-a-week national situation room where we have BOM data that flows into our systems, into our picture, if you like, along with all of the state emergency data as well. So we also have embedded BOM officers in our national situation room. So that is invaluable, as you can imagine, in that lead up and then during an event to understand what's happening, what will occur as far as forecasting can predict. That directly informs how we support states on the coordination side, non-financial assets that the state might require, e.g. use of aircraft, the national stockpile that we run, etc. So it's a really close operational working relationship with the BOM.
That's great, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, Tom Benning, for Gray. In terms of emergency response and management, how important are Doppler radar coverage to manage said events?
So I would first of all note that, apologies, I'm not a meteorologist at all, and as we've just discussed, we have a really close working relationship with the BOM.
Yep.
But NEMA's role is not to maintain that weather forecasting or monitoring ability. That is definitely the BOM's role. So my apologies, I probably can't give you an informed view.
Yep.
My apologies. The BOM, however, I'm sure would be able to give you a much more informed view than I can.
And in terms of work of the department over the last 5, 10 years, whatever's more convenient, what would be the proportions of work towards events around floods and cyclones and bushfires and other sort of categories? What sort of the generalised categories and anything that's of note in regional South Australia?
Yeah, so NEMA has an all hazards remit. The disaster recovery funding arrangements are focused specifically, so the financial support for recovery is focused on rapid onset natural hazards. As you would expect as a result of that our focus of work, our workload is completely driven by
Events.
Exactly. And so the answer to the question would actually be what events have occurred in Australia over the last 5 years, 10 years, and that will tell you where our focus has had to be. So in 2022, as you would expect, significant flooding year in this country, unfortunately, enormous focus on flood events. This year, unfortunately, in Victoria, enormous focus on fire events. In Queensland, though, flooding and cyclone. In this country, because we are so large and such disparate climatic areas, we see lots of different things, often concurrently. So you can often get, storms, cyclones, fires, floods, the occasional earthquake happening almost concurrently.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Mr. Smith?
Cool. I'm the member for Leichhardt, which I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with. I guess couple of questions. One, do we have an idea of how much of the disasters, as a percentage, I guess, is impacting rural, regional, remote areas versus your kind of major populations? And you touched briefly on insurance. Up my way, few of the councils are looking to self-insure rather than hold insurance over their assets.
Yep.
And that possibly creates cost shifting. But given the funding that's available for improvements and resilience, floodproof doors, that kind of stuff for your libraries and that sort of infrastructure, is there any information that's available to councils about a possible reduction in insurance costs to encourage them back into the insurance pool rather than relying on disaster funding post-event based on improvements to community assets, be they sporting clubs, libraries? I mean, roads and bridges are always going to be a much different thing, but there's a lot of money that goes into repairing the playground that the kids are relying on, or the floors of the basketball court, or things like that. I guess that's probably, given the insurance climate, is something it's putting a lot of costs onto these local councils. They're not insuring, they're relying on self-insurance, and then they're relying on federal government funding to carry that load, and it can take a little bit of time.
No, it's a good set of questions, and it's a tricky set of issues, as you're calling out. On your first part of your question, which is about kind of what's the breakdown of impact of disasters on local governments in different areas. So over the last 3 years, we have seen 32% of local governments being impacted who are in a regional area. We've seen 25% in outer regional and 25% of remote. So that tells you exactly to your point. There are many LGAs and councils who are impacted who are not in a city, not metropolitan, which poses obviously a whole raft of challenges around recovery. On insurance, this is an issue that we've been dealing with for some time. We know that when assets have been constructed at a community level like levies, there have been measurable and sometimes significant reductions in insurance premiums. So, Roma levy, levies in other parts of Queensland, there have been in the past significant reductions in insurance premiums. Similarly, we know that in North Queensland, where actions are taken to make a house more cyclone proof, let's say cyclone resistant, that can be reflected in reductions in insurance premiums as well. We know that with recent work that we've funded the Resilient Building Council in doing, which is setting up a Resilient Building Council app where homeowners can self-assess their home from bushfire in relation to bushfire risk, and where they take actions to meet a certain level of bushfire, resilience, if I use that term. We know that 2 insurers are recognising that and are reducing premiums, and we know that 1 bank is reducing slightly interest rates to that. So we know there are examples of where this can have measurable impact. Can more be done though? Absolutely. We are working with insurers through the Hazards Insurance Partnership I touched on at the moment to say, right, what can we agree on is a set of principles that both you and the government will agree to make sure that any investment that anyone puts into risk mitigation. So if the Insurance Council of Australia has been publicly on record as saying we think government should invest $300 million in a range of infrastructure hardening or infrastructure risk reduction build activities, the quid pro quo is, if the government were to do that, if any government were to invest, how do they get that surety then that will be reflected subsequently it will be recognised and then reflected in insurance premiums? So much of the work that's going on at the moment with the insurers on the hip, of which there's all the big ones, and the Insurance Council of Australia is going to write, can we agree on what types of mitigation, what are the principles that we will all agree we will recognise to start to recognise insurance and flow that through investment and flow that through to premiums going forwards.
You mentioned before I think it was called the Council to Council program.
That's right.
Are there other examples of innovation or things happening that would help local councils across the country? What would you like to see that would help councils? I mean, I guess as a committee, we want to come up with some positive, options and recommendations.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that the Council to Council program is a standout from NEMA's point of view, in terms of innovativeness as well as practicality. And so it is highly regarded. It's LGAQ, as I said, runs it. I think the opportunity for it to scale nationally is significant, were other states to look at doing that. The other aspect that we hear from local councils, which I suspect would be valuable to many, is some kind of, I don't know how to put this eloquently, some kind of roving grant writing team. Yeah. So often councils would love to apply for a grant, maybe in the disaster relief fund, but also any other grant, you know, that not just in our neck of the woods, but elsewhere, to actually get money to do stuff. But again, they often, particularly if you're talking the more remote outer regional folk, they often don't have the people who've got the time or the capability to do it. And so I know in the States, in the US, for example, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, a bit like our equivalent, has got roving grant teams that can be deployed to help impacted communities write grants to get funding. You know, is there a world in which something like that might help councils? I suspect there is.
Great, thank you.
So can I back to the funding arrangement?
Sure.
And there's particularly around the states reporting back to NEMA about expenditure. And you've got a section in the arrangement around quarterly budget reports.
That's right.
How do you approach those budgets? Are you looking to see whether there's significant gaps between the amount that the state's actually physically outlaid to councils and the estimated reconstruction costs? And how do you treat circumstances like that?
So a lot of effort goes into the monitoring and collection of this information. And we're conscious too that providing the information to NEMA from the state, they have to go to the council first to get a lot of it too. So we're conscious of reporting load here. We're trying to balance. That said, every quarter states submit for all of their programs, for all disaster events, their financial and delivery estimates. So it's not just for a given program, let's say for a primary producer grant program, we got funded 10 million, we've spent 8 million. It's also, well, how many grants have gone out, and it's information about delivery. Or for rebuilding of a bridge, if I pick that example, you've been funded, $50 million. It's a big bridge, you've spent 30 million, but where they're also required to say how much has been delivered. So have you delivered 10% of it? Have you delivered 80% of it? And so that information comes in quarterly so you can track. We look for flags associated with either under or overspend. So overspend clearly can be a concern for all the normal reasons. Underspend, though, can be a major concern because it means that money, from our point of view, has been allocated or has gone out and to a community that's got a recovery need, and for whatever reason it's not being delivered. Why is that? So that will prompt us to go back to the state and say, look, for this project, you're saying you've only spent 2%, or what's happening there. So we follow up. On the issue of estimated reconstruction costs that you talked about, for assets, same story. So money goes out. It's a slightly different financial process for that, but nevertheless, an amount is agreed that will be paid to support the reconstruction of that asset. That is tracked as well.
So can I just go to an example,
Please.
if that's all right? So with Mid-Coast Council, they've got an estimated total recovery cost at the present of $226.5 million. To date, the council itself has spent $43 million on recovery, and they've only been reimbursed $3 million.
Okay, yep.
Would that be something that you would see come through in the quarterly reports, and would that be a red flag we
won't see how much a council has been reimbursed in reporting, or any other delivery agency that's delivering something in reporting, because we see the state estimates. And the reimbursement arrangements vary enormously between states and local, for what happens between a state and a local council. What I would say, though, is that a number of states will give advance payments to council. and again, this is different statewide,
Yeah.
across different states. A lot of states will give advance payments, could be as much as 50% of the value of something that has to be fixed or repaired up front, and then progressive amounts to avoid a cash flow problem for councils. Other states have different processes. So what we will see is at the state level, this particular program has spent this amount of money, this is where they're tracking, and then when there's a flag, we will go and make
But
inquiries.
isn't it a problem if the money that the Commonwealth is committing to a disaster is about ensuring, reconstruction is delivered?
Absolutely, yep.
You don't have line of sight then that the council's actually getting the money from the states.
Well, that's-
You're outlaying
yeah.
laying it to the
Yep,
states,
yep.
but that's not the end point. The end point are the local councils.
Yep, absolutely.
And given we're a committee that's looking at financial sustainability,
Yep, understand.
this goes to the core when they're drawing down on their BAU expenditure. Yeah.
Oh, completely
Yeah,
agree.
yeah.
And I guess I would note again that the challenge is different states have very different systems here. So we fund the state, or we cost share with the state. States have very different arrangements with their councils. We track at the state level delivery. So we will know that if a bridge is behind and hasn't spent, we will get reporting on that. If primary producer grants are massively undersubscribed or over, we'll get reporting on that, whoever's delivered it. But the timing of cash flows and transfers between the state and the local council is very determined within each jurisdiction at the state level.
May I ask one other question, please? Just going to reconstruction
Sure.
Of essential public infrastructure.
Yes.
It notes in the DRFA
That's right,
a timeline of about 3 months to start. So I've got a community in Wingham. The Bight Bridge was completely washed away and destroyed. The communities are now cut off.
Yep.
Wingham CBD, the business community suffering.
Yep.
Schools, people can't get to school, can't get to the farm, etc.
Yes.
Hour and a half round trips for people to go to work.
Yes.
Nothing has happened on the ground with that bridge. Yet in here it says there needs to be something commenced within 3 months. And I appreciate, the scale of the disaster and the impact on the council, but again, NEMA's role in making sure that work is happening, communities are seeing progress. If we're expending money in a Commonwealth, we want to see it actually hitting the ground.
Yep. So absolutely, fully agree.
Yeah.
And so emergency and immediate roadworks, that can start immediately as soon as it's safe to do so. Rebuilding of big assets is often tricky for the council to start. They can't start it until they've worked out what actually has happened, what's needed to rebuild the thing, because as we've discussed before, conditions may have changed, there might be really good reasons why it has to be built differently, etc. That requires someone, engineers and others, to come in and say, right, what actually is the solution here with this bridge? Do we rebuild it the same, differently? Does it need to be in a different spot, whatever? The betterment question will come up at that point as well. The state has 12 months after the year in which the disaster event occurs to submit to NEMA their estimated reconstruction cost. And so that's the point at which they've got evidence of what's happened, they've got an engineer or whoever to sign off, this is the treatment solution, it's been verified, it comes to us and we say, yep, fine, off you go, get on with it. But almost regardless of who's paying for whatever, there's going to be that design process whereby, if it's something as significant as that, which that is, and I've seen images of that, of that particular bridge, it will take time for relevant engineers to work out what the solution is to get it costed and then to get that verified. So there is, in any system, there's going to be a lag there, unfortunately. Yeah.
But you have line of sight.
We have
on
line
the
of sight, so
price of
absolutely.
what's
So that
happening with
estimated
that.
reconstruction cost, as I said, there's timelines stipulated in the DRFA on when that has to come to us. There's rules about how the price can be constructed. It can't just be a number in the air. It can be estimated in a couple of ways, but there are a methodology around that. If it's above a certain financial threshold, it has to be reviewed by an independent technical reviewer so that everyone is happy that this is an appropriate value for money solution. But it will necessarily, I'm sorry, it will take them some time.
That's understood. There's time, but it's still.
But we will see the cost and we will track that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, if I could just ask one last question, hopefully a simple one. Following a disaster, many members of local communities we know are experiencing heavy financial burdens. Have local governments mentioned issues regarding ratepayers being able to afford their rates following a disaster, and what support is currently available for them when this happens?
Yes, this has certainly cropped up previously. If I take one step back, states have actually got a few levers and local governments have a few levers available to them, rates being one. Also, waiving or reduction of waste disposal fees is another example. So there's a few levers at the level of the state or the council which may be available to states to implement, to provide support. Okay. Certainly we're aware that there have been instances of rates relief provided to local community residents. We know it's been done post the 22 floods in New South Wales. We know it was done last year following the Mid-North Coast floods. Sometimes that's managed locally through existing council rates hardship mechanisms. Sometimes it's managed through the state, so the state might actually provide additional support, or sometimes in New South Wales, in fact, the state has delivered rates relief through Service New South Wales via a crediting mechanism. So yes, that can be something that's cropped up, and there are different ways to handle it.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think here we go. Thank you for your attendance here today. If you have been asked to provide any additional information, would you please forward it to the Secretariat by the 11th of March 2026. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I now declare the hearing closed.